So I want to discuss a recent initiative to the people that was launched here in Washington State last week called I-2066, Stop the Gas Ban, Protect Energy Choice. Now, this is very time sensitive, and the mainstream and then the government-approved media, they're just not going to cover this story adequately. And you, my viewers, should actually know what is happening here. Now, I'll explain why the window to collect these signatures is actually so tight, and I hope to explain in brief the backstory so that you can understand why this effort is so popular right now. Okay, so just last year and the year before, I did a variety of stories about various initiative efforts in Washington State, and this was mostly covering the two efforts by the Let's Go Washington groups dominantly sponsored by Brian Haywood, who I've actually interviewed several times on our show in the past. You can see that in some of the past videos. It's impossible to probably cover every initiative effort out there, but it is worth discussing some of them. And this recent initiative, I-2066, titled Stop the Gas Ban, Protect Energy Choice, is worth discussing right now because it was just officially launched last week after the final ballot title challenge was settled in Thurston County Superior Court. I'm actually holding a signature sheet from this initiative campaign, and I will suspect that many of you are going to actually see signature gatherers all over Washington State collecting signatures in front of stores, businesses, at churches, and those signature sheets are going to look like this. Now, well, there are many organizations and groups who are essentially sponsoring or supporting this effort right now. And this actually includes the Building Industry Association of Washington, the Washington Realtors and the Contractors, as well as the Washington Hospitality Association, among many others. It is actually worth noting that Let's Go Washington is also supporting this effort right now. And this matters because, of course, they are launching this effort after they just completed the most successful signature gathering effort in American history, not just Washington State history, last year, where they successfully completed and submitted 6 initiatives to the legislature last December, which included a total of 2.7 million signatures. That's no small feat. Now, this was the largest number of successful initiatives to the legislature just ever submitted to the Washington Secretary of State in history. And this was the largest number of initiatives to be submitted to the Washington State Legislature all at the same time as well. Now, I point this out because, well, the establishment and the leftists in our state largely ignored Let's Go Washington's efforts in the past, and this was mainly because their efforts in 2022 on the 11 initiatives failed. Now that the Let's Go Washington, sponsored by Brian Haywood Group, has demonstrated such dramatic success last year, they will not be ignored by anybody any longer. So what's the difference between the successful initiatives of the Let's Go Washington people completed last year and the solo initiative, I-2066, that they're launching right now? Well, the biggest difference really is the fact that this time, I-2066 is an initiative to the people, which has a much tighter time frame than the initiatives to the legislature that were completed last year. The Let's Go Washington folk and their supporters, they still must collect almost 325,000 signatures, but they have to submit these to the Secretary of State by July 5th, which essentially means they have to finish the signature gathering efforts just before the July 4th holiday. Now, I mentioned the 325,000 signatures, but in reality, as we've discussed in the past, they have to submit probably more than 405,000 signatures by that time frame just to be safe, which is really still a very steep lift and a lot of work in a very short time frame. Now, if they are successful in the signature gathering effort, this initiative to the people, I-2066, to stop the natural gas ban and protect energy choice, will be on the ballot this November. And this is going to be on the ballot in combination with the already successful 3 initiatives to the legislature that were completed by the Let's Go Washington, sponsored by Brian Haywood effort last year. So remember, they had succeeded at the time with all 6 of their initiatives to the legislature last year, and while the Democrats actively fought all of them in an effort to just reduce the number of political fights, the Democrats ultimately compromised, and they decided they didn't want to have that many fights on their hands going into this election year, so they decided to triage and pass the 3 initiatives that restored good public policy. For example, restoring reasonable police pursuit, reinforcing the state ban on income tax, and then restoring parental transparency in education and medical services to children. And those 3 initiatives, right now, They're going to be on those who became Washington state law based on last year's signature gathering efforts. And then, of course, the capitulation by the Democrats in both the state Senate and legislature. But the other three initiatives, which are featured right here, we've discussed at length on this channel in the past: repealing Inslee's pet project, which is the unpopular hidden gas tax, to repeal the soon-to-be expanded capital gains tax, and to allow people the option of opting out of the horrific payroll tax for the nearly useless long-term care tax scam. So if this current effort to pass Initiative 2066, the Stop the Gas Ban and Protect Energy Choice initiative, is actually successful, there will be not just these three initiatives right here, but there's going to be 4 initiatives on the ballot in November. And remember, all of these initiatives are at the top of the ballot. They're ahead of the president, the congressional races, and all the other elections in the state. So these are going to be the first things voters are going to see on their ballot. And they are all very popular with average people who know that they're getting screwed by our state government and they want to pay less. I will note, actually, that the campaign tagline to support these current initiatives is relatively simple. It's vote yes, pay less. Easy to understand, and it really isn't hard for anybody to recognize that. Now, the opposition to these initiatives is confusing and it's weird, but it essentially boils down to, trust us, we will spend your money better than you can. Now, who can actually believe that if they've ever paid attention to government? So why is the initiative, this current initiative, even an issue right now? Well, last year, in a highly controversial move, the Democrats in the Washington state legislature, right up here, with a strong push from Governor Inslee and other wealthy special interests, they decided to continue down the road to serfdom by increasing the cost of living for Washington state residents by passing House Bill 1589. And I'll actually link to the original bill in the description down below. And while it was fought by the minority of Republicans in the legislature at the time, and they were actually able to water down some of the more kind of insane aspects of that bill, it was passed at 2 a.m., the dead of the night, with little fanfare and much embarrassment. Now, it still essentially sets the stage to ban natural gas in our homes. It doesn't ban natural gas outright just yet, but it does give Puget Sound Energy, the main provider of power and natural gas to most customers in the Puget Sound region, the ability to radically increase the cost of power to its customers without any kind of Utility Trade Commission sort of restrictions that would normally be used to reduce the increase in rates to consumers. Now, eventually, following the roadmap that HB 1589 lays out, natural gas would no longer be available to most households at some point in time in the near future, and everyone would be paying far more on their power bills in the meantime, right now. Now, the original bill was exclusively just kind of this creature of special interests hiding behind a climate change agenda justification. But the only green thing that they actually want is the cash they plan to extract from the rest of us by forcing regular people to pay far more for far less, or special subsidies to political insiders for overpriced services and products that nobody can afford. And this gives Puget Sound Energy a get-out-of-jail-free card to screw the consumer. That's you and I. Now, this is typical for most legislation proposed by government. In D.C. or Olympia, they tend to push too far and then expose themselves even more than they expected. The reality is that this absurd special interest public policy push is super unpopular. It's everywhere. Depending on the polls you can read for yourself, it is somewhere north of 70 to up to 80% of the population is vehemently opposed to this level of special interest stupidity, masquerading as some kind of rational government policy. Now, frankly, they should not have any difficulty, they being the Let's Go Washington folk, anybody else out there working over the next month or so, they should not have any difficulty gathering the signatures. But the challenge is, and it's always about the logistics of doing so in a quick and timely manner. Speed is of the essence for these guys. And I'll link to some of the supporters' websites down below if you want to get more information about this issue. And I'd encourage you to quickly get your signature sheets into the Let's Go Washington group as soon as you actually can so that you can complete them, because timing is obviously everything, and they have essentially 5 weeks to get this done. And that really is not a lot of time when you look at the volume of signatures they're trying to gather. Now, here's just another wrinkle to this fiasco of a public policy debacle, and that's really requiring this initiative in the first place. In many ways, the Democrats of Washington state, they take their marching orders from their puppet masters back in D.C. We see this all the time. Our Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, simply imitates the Biden regime's efforts to create a total censorship operation in government. And when Ferguson proposed his Ministry of Truth program in HB 1333, which we've discussed before, he was simply following their guidelines. Governor Inslee simply does what he's told by California Governor Newsom or special interests out of D.C. for his hidden gas tax scam last year that this initiative, one of the initiatives, is set to repeal. The same dynamic is all at play right now with the effort to ban natural gas in our state. The D.C. elite have been floating this scheme for a while now, and while most politicians in America reject it as insane or very harmful to the public, which it clearly is, in Washington state, our Democratic Party leadership is always willing to jump, and they'll jump right off whatever cliff they're told to do so by their D.C. controllers. So they're always willing to carry this water and hope of some pat on the head from D.C., and that really is what brings us here. So now that the Democrats want to travel down another policy sinkhole that will only increase the cost of living for regular people like you and I, what do they have to do? Well, their first step is to buy out their opposition. Puget Sound Energy is the largest privately owned electrical and gas utility provider in Washington state, with a total monopoly for much of western Washington. Puget Sound Energy today is mostly owned by Canadian corporations, so the owners don't even live here. Now, generally, like any regulated business, they don't want to increase their costs or reduce their business opportunities. That's a rational expectation. They are a monopoly, however, and Washington state, through the Utility and Transportation Commission, regulates rate increases. And in many ways, at least in theory, they exist to keep this monopoly from kind of screwing over the people who actually receive their power needs from this one source. It's their only option, which is the only choice most of us have who live in that area to get the needed kind of power. So how do you get this monopoly to support your consumer, very harmful plan? Well, you buy them off first. It's easy. This is exactly what the Democrats did with House Bill 1589. They bought off Puget Sound Energy by giving them basically a free pass, kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card with the Utility and Transportation Commission so that Puget Sound Energy could raise their rates on all their customers, not just those who get natural gas today, but to every single one, everyone, even if you just get power, so that Puget Sound Energy can afford to then write down and eventually stop providing natural gas supply in the future. This is just one big con, and a game where only consumers lose. The cost of living essentially goes up aggressively, and all the political insiders, they get a profit from this experience. Now, it's really an ugly thing to watch, and nothing said by Puget Sound Energy can be trusted at all with this type of payoff going on in the background. Worse than this already, according to many sources, 64% of the 1.2 million customers or so of Puget Sound Energy report that they're already having trouble paying their power bills, which have greatly increased over the past few years, due largely in part to just a plethora of past legislation, also passed by the Washington State Democrats, which each simply piles on top of the previous piece of legislation to increase the cost of living for regular people. Now, by the way, I found just an easy visual way to kind of represent this situation using the most recent example of HB 1589. You can look here at the Washington State Utilities and Transportation Commission logo, which looks sort of like a Venn diagram. Now, first you have the Democrat politicians, and they control the legislature, the governor, and all the bureaucrats. Then, of course, you have the utilities that they're supposed to regulate and theoretically have some oversight, like Puget Sound Energy. Then, of course, you have the campaign contributions from these same utilities and the special interests who benefit from gaming the system. These are the vendors who profit from the kickbacks and policy changes. And then finally, the green represents the consumers, you and I, who get squeezed for every dollar, every green dollar that they can extract from us. We're the losers in this situation. Now, I've done some videos in the past about how government's intervention in so many areas of our lives has only made things worse for us. And certainly, this intervention usually benefits special interests and political insiders, but it always hurts everyone else. Now, we can see this repeatedly with their legislation on energy, the food supply, housing, transportation, healthcare, etc. They can't help themselves. This is just the effective result of policies that politicians and their special interests who don't really care one whit what it costs you and I to live or even just survive. Now, repeatedly, they pass legislation that they celebrate, which only hurts us in practice and implementation. And yet somehow, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence, they always get more campaign contributions. The special interests who lobby them, they always seem to benefit financially, and you and I get to hold the bag and pay the price. Now, nobody involved in this process cares about the people, just lining their own pockets. And this is a real problem, and I believe it's a clear manifestation of what is broken, not just in our state, but everywhere in our country. Now, I suspect people are waking up to the game. I believe Initiative I-2066 is just the latest example of people trying to push back against what is clearly broken in our state. We see similar efforts around the country that are starting to pop up. And essentially, these are defensive moves to protect us and our future against the people who are hurting us. I generally support these efforts because we must fix what is broken. Now, nothing is perfect, and there are no magical solutions that lead to butterflies, bluebirds, and rainbows into some kind of utopian future. But we can grind away and fix the problems that we find as they become so obviously abusive. The only upside I see from the level of abuse coming out of government today is the fact that it becomes harder and harder for people to sleep through the abuse. Now, nobody is safe from these guys, and if we can find ways to stop their abuse or fix what they broke, we should do so, even if it is only a start on the path to a long road to fixing more. You got to start somewhere. And if you're new to the effort, maybe you can take your first step helping this initiative right now. Perhaps that can be the start of your journey to join many others who are trying to push back against the people in government who just seem to enjoy hurting us at every opportunity they get. Now, regardless of where you start, however, the only way you can make an impact, and if you basically get out there and you start to show up. And showing up is far more than just voting. You can't hide from this or the people in charge of our government today. They will hurt you no matter what, as they demonstrate every day that they run things. You may not be interested in government or public policy, but that doesn't matter. They're interested in you, and their interest is mostly rapacious and not good. And as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.